The PPS-43 Submachine Gun, one of cinema's most overlooked submachine guns, but also one of World War II's best. It was produced in high numbers. Over 2 million were made between 1942 and 1946. Despite being one of the best submachine guns of the war, and produced in the millions, it's often overshadowed by the PPS-41, a staple in every Soviet and Russian war movie. 6 million PPS-41s were made during World War II. But let's take a look at the PPS-43, one of the best and most overshadowed submachine guns of World War II, and highlight some of the movies it's featured in, if only briefly. The Soviets started World War II with limited stocks of submachine guns. It was only after fighting the Finnish and going up against the Wolmi 31, they realized how effective they could be. Submachine guns at the start of World War II were still a fairly new concept, but for most militaries would become a critical weapon during the war. Many nations looked to adopt an inexpensive design during the war, to quickly produce the millions needed. The Soviets' first prolific submachine gun was the PPS-41, which was a good submachine gun with an amazing rate of fire, but ultimately the Soviets wanted something cheaper to manufacture, as they started mobilizing the man and woman power of the entire Soviet Union. In 1942, trials began for a new submachine gun. The competition for the Soviet Union's next submachine gun would be won by weapons designer Alexei Sudyev, who was featured in the film Kalashnikov from 2020, competing against Mikhail Kalashnikov, inventor of the AK-47. In 1942, Kalashnikov designed a submachine gun, the PPK-42, a forgotten design on his road to the famous AK-47. Sudyev won the competition with the PPS. Like most firearms, the PPS-43 was an evolution of her previous design, based on the work of firearms designer Bezruko Vysotsky, but it was Sudyev's work that made the gun as effective as it was. Despite the submachine gun looking rather basic, the PPS had a lot going for it. It was reliable, controllable, and lightweight at 2.7 kilograms, or just under 6.2 pounds. Most importantly, as a mid-war production, it was easy and inexpensive to manufacture. The PPS also did away with the unpopular drum magazines you often see on the PPS-41. Drum magazines were a notorious bottleneck in production output. The magazine for the PPS-43 was a 35-round double-stack, double-feed magazine. It was more reliable and held more ammunition than a British Sten or German MP40, which had a single-feed magazine. The 43 also had a long magazine guide that could be securely and intuitively gripped. This was great for quick training, as inexperienced troops of all nationalities often used submachine gun magazines as grips themselves, which could cause malfunction. One of the reasons the PPS-43 shows up sprinkled throughout movies, and never in the same number as the PPS-H, is that production first started in Leningrad during the siege of Leningrad, going right from the production line into the hands of soldiers on the front lines. They were distributed immediately and as needed. Luckily for those receiving them, they were easy to use in service with little training. The siege of Leningrad lasted from September of 41 until January of 1944. Ironically, the ease of use of this weapon also made it highly popular with German or even Finnish infantry. In the film titled 1944 from 2015, the weapon is shown being praised and used by Estonian SS soldiers. It's a nice touch on a very detail-oriented film. The fact that the PPS was able to continue to be manufactured in Leningrad while it was under siege was a tribute to this gun's ease of production. It was made up of about 90% bent sheet metal. Almost any factory that worked in the metal industry could be set up to manufacture this gun. It required very little in specialist equipment or skilled workers. To manufacture a PPS-43 took around 2.7 hours per gun. To manufacture the PPS-41 took 7.3 hours. Both would be manufactured at the same time, however, as PPS-H factories by mid to late war were running at peak efficiency, and factories that couldn't manufacture the PPS-H could manufacture the PPS. In industrial terms, the PPS was a giant success at expanding overall submachine gun manufacturing.
You know, it's experience that wins the day. It's not all about firepower.
Boys, if I may?
The PPS-43 had a basic yet practical safety. No select lever, the gun fires in full auto only. Radar fires around 600 rounds per minute, so if you practice you could squeeze off a single shot with it. Interestingly, the rate of fire was about half that of the PPS-41, and the magazine was also about half the capacity of the 41's drum, so firing time was about the same in theory. Despite the metal folding stock, which is basically the same as the German MP40s, it was comfortable to fire and highly controllable. Rear sight has a 2-position notch, going from 100 to 200 meters.
Friendlies. Clear.
The PPS-43 design would be adopted by other nations, most notably under license by the Chinese, but also copied by the Finns, who captured them during the continuation war towards the end of World War II. The Finns adapted them for use with the Suomi M31 drums. You can catch Chinese use of the PPS in 7 years in Tibet, being used by Chinese communist forces. China invaded Tibet in 1950, so these would have been supplied PPS-43s from the Soviet Union. The Chinese started making their own licensed version in 1953. In We Were Soldiers from 2002, you can briefly see a PPS-43 or Chinese copy being used by Viet Minh forces against the French in 1954 during the First Indochina War. One of the more interesting appearances of the PPS-43 is in the North Korean Wolmi Island from 1982. The weapon shown here is a Chinese Type 43, supplied to North Korea during the Korean War. The film is worth a watch if you're interested in North Korean propaganda. Propaganda has its own place in history, and is an interesting study within itself. If there is one Russian movie to watch featuring significant use of the PPS-43, try The Star from 2002. It has a recognizable plot of hand-picked men sent on a suicidal mission. The action has good pacing and the characters are believable. With Hollywood actors and production value removed here, the cliché story actually comes off as a fresh war film. Ultimately, the PPS-43 made a significant impact arming the Soviets during World War II. It further helped establish a doctrine of simple and reliable, no doubt having an influence on other weapons. By the 1950s, the Soviets would start replacing the bulk of their 7.62 by 25mm Tukarev caliber submachine guns with the AK-47. Alright, I'm Johnny. Thanks for watching this brief on the PPS-43. As always, feel free to add any knowledge you might have in the comments section, or recommend any good films. I hope to see you in the next video.